welcome everybody to my talk on generative AI, a personal journey on revolutionizing workflows. Before I start my presentation, I want to give like a little Easter egg / hint. If you see an image at the bottom, you will see some text. That's the prompt I used to use a tool to generate the image in the slide. But before I start, there's a big fat disclaimer. I myself work for the Rabobank. And of course, we're a very big organization, so there's a lot of risks with using generative AI. So within the bank right now, we have a ban for the general employee to use generative AI. So that is like the baseline, but within the bank, we're looking at some task forces and some people who have, so to say, extra privileges that they can try out these tools and see within the risks if we can use these tools in a good manner, because we're a bank, so we have a lot of sensitive information and we don't want to have that leak on the street. Getting away from this disclaimer, my name is Constantijn Herpers. I'm a senior front-end developer, work at the Rabobank, as I mentioned, and I am part of a team that works on the design system. The design system, it's cool to work for or work on as well. It's being used by 150 plus feature teams, so it's always a very interesting challenge to make sure that it's backwards compatible, new features are generic enough, etc., etc. But I hear you thinking that what does this have to do with AI? Well, not much, at least not yet. But these task forces I mentioned within the Rabobank is that I am one of them, I'm part of one of them. And we have multiple piloting groups. We also have some other task forces which look at a broader place to use generative AI, but my place is mostly looking at the coding aspect of our work. But first, I would like to get some terminology out of the way. So we have AI for quite a long time. It's also very difficult to say what is AI and what is not AI. Some companies say, we're an AI company, but it's basically just an algorithm, that's it. But for this presentation, I want to make the distinction between that AI is like good at classification, regression, and pattern recognition, and generative AI is more human-like. So if you give it a prompt, its primary purpose is to create something that resembles a human output. Getting back to the presentation, there's two main takeaways I want you to get from this presentation, and one that for me, it's been revolutionizing my workflow. I've been a developer for over 10 years, and tech has come and gone. Like it was already mentioned, when I started, we still used SVN, and now we have, for example, Git. But it's like small updates to the workflow. But with AI, I really noticed that I in some parts start to rely on that AI can really help me. And later on in the presentation, of course, I will talk about what those parts are. But I think it can really help you in your day-to-day workflow. Oh, sorry, I kept this image in there. I actually meant to show this one. The second takeaway is inspiration. For me, the image generation tool, which I'll discuss later, is really a source of inspiration for me. And to show you what I mean, is that the top one is, of course, very beautiful, but that's the thing I can create with my hands. But the thing I have in my head is the bottom image. So if I'm searching for some kind of inspiration, I'm not very good at drawing, but I have the idea in my head, and I see that generative AI can help me go from the top one to the bottom one. I am taking a submission, so after the talk, if you want the top image, you can come to me and I'll gladly draw it for you. So why all this hype on generative AI? Because it's been booming lately, and there's new tools coming every day. But why should we take a look at it? And I think that numbers do a lot of the talking. So when ChatGPT got released, it had, according to their numbers, in 5 days it had 1 million users. Other people say 2 months, but either way, both are respectable numbers to get to 1 million users in such a short time span. So they're doing something right. So I wanted to just have like a small show of hands. Who uses generative AI here into their day-to-day workflow? Okay. For the people who didn't, show of hands, hopefully I can inspire you. And for the people who did do a show of hands, I hope your employer is accepting the risks. But getting to the generative AI tools, I wanted to, initially I had an idea to make a slide with all the tools that are there and make like an icon and a name, but that would have probably taken me weeks because there's such a long list. So I only took like a smaller list. We can already see that there's so many tools that it's difficult to distinguish like which ones are great and which ones are not that great. Not to say that the ones that are now going to disappear are not great. I don't have an opinion on that. I just want to show a couple of them which I find really, really cool. So today we're going to look at GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, and Midjourney. And Midjourney is the tool I use to generate the images. But before that, we have to talk about a boring subject, risks. And when you think about risks and AI, there's a lot of risks. There's even more than this, but I just wanted to have like an overview of what are a couple of them. And I underlined 3 of them, so privacy concerns, misinformation, and lack of verification, and those will come back into the presentation on how you can misuse some of these tools. But the main thing I want to talk about with you as risk is to be smart about it. So for me, the quote of the day is think before you prompt. So before you send something over the line, so to say, to a generative AI tool, really think about what you're sending. Because if you don't use it responsibly, I didn't want to shame the company, but I think that this is a very popular headline. A lot of people probably know which company it is. But they had a meeting about very sensitive data, and they wanted to have a summary of that meeting, and they put everything in ChatGPT, and you create a data leak that way, which is think before you prompt. So, looking at the first tool, I find it funny that I asked Midjourney to give me image on GitHub Copilot. I didn't specify anything else, and it gave me an image of a cat. So the myth is true. The internet is run by cats. And I use this for code generation and documentation. Currently, it's behind a subscription model. But if you have a nice employer, they might pay it for you. So what is GitHub Copilot? The main takeaway for the Copilot is that it's a co-pilot. So you shouldn't worry that it will replace your job or anything, at least not now. But it's a co-pilot, so you're the main pilot. You're driving, you're flying the plane, and Copilot will give you suggestions on how to go further. And you take those suggestions and mold them to what you need, and you go further. And a very nice thing of GitHub Copilot is that it does these suggestions directly in your IDE. And that basically comes down to less developer flow interruption. As a developer, you know that if you're working on something and you have to break out of your IDE and go look on Google, it breaks your flow. And we all know that if you're in the flow, you can do twice as much work if you're out the flow. So this will help you with less developer flow interruption. So a little bit on what we did as the Rabobank. Around, I think it's a year ago now, we started with a small pilot of GitHub Copilot. And we had 25 developers of 2 different areas within the bank. We gave them 1.5 months of usage. And we wanted to see like how it responded and what are the risks from GitHub Copilot, and do we accept those risks. And talking about the risks of GitHub Copilot, we had a meeting with GitHub themselves. And they assured us that if you have a business license, that's an important aspect, that the moment you're writing code and some of the code is sent over the line, they use that code only to give you a suggestion, and then when it's sent back, they have amnesia, they forget it. So that risk is covered. If you have a personal license, the model is trained on your code, so be aware of that. One of the most important things with using generative AI is context. If you give it the right context, it will give you the right suggestions. If you give it the wrong context, it will give you a suggestion, and it might be a wrong suggestion, might be a good suggestion, but it's also to manage your own expectations. So what can this tool actually do for you is also done by what kind of context you give it. So I found this meme the other day, which I find really funny, that somebody on a programming Reddit said this there, that GitHub Copilot sees all the variables you name after your pets. So be aware of doing that, because you know security questions, for example, are also based on your pet names. So be aware that you don't send that over the line. So I want to give an example. This is the prompt way, how I call it, with using GitHub Copilot. So I write in a comment what I want, and this goes back to context. So I give it the context. I want a function that makes the app faster. You can already see that it's super vague, because what does that mean? It doesn't have enough context to actually do something. So the code it produces is basically worthless. So I try again, and I give it better context. So now I give it a much smaller and precise context. I say I want a function which checks if a certain string matches a postal code. And it can actually do that. So while I start writing, it's completing my function. And it generates the code. However, this is actually not what I wanted to get, because I wanted to have a Dutch postal code. And as you can see, the regex looks a little bit like a postal code, but it's not Dutch at all. Maybe it's American, I don't know. So I do another iteration, and I give it some more information, so more context. I say, well, actually, what I meant is that a valid pattern must follow the Dutch postal code rules. So I try again. I remove the 2 lines of code, and it suggests me new lines. And with these new lines, you can already see that this is actually a valid Dutch postal code pattern. And the first time I did this, I was surprised that it actually taught me something as well, because I was not aware that a Dutch postal code cannot start with a 0, and that there are certain character combinations which are not allowed. If you're wondering why those character combinations are not allowed, it's related to the Second World War. But this is one way of using it. The way I use it more is more contextual suggestion. So you see that there was already a unit test, and there were some lines of code, and based on those lines of code, it suggested me that I wanted to call the click on the button, and then expect the mock to be called X amount of times. This is more how I use GitHub Copilot, that based on the context that's around the code, it gives me suggestions for that code, instead of writing the comment and then letting it suggest me something. So after the initial pilot in the Rabobank, we sent out a questionnaire, which was broken down into 3 main categories, so productivity, satisfaction, quality, and efficiency. There are a lot more sub-points, but I won't put them on the slide. I just want to take some highlights out of it. So from all the developers, there was a satisfaction of 94% with GitHub Copilot. They reported that they had an improved productivity of 80%, and 88% of them reported a time save. Those numbers for me are like staggeringly high. And that also contributes a little bit to what I think to the generative AI hype, but even if it's like a little bit lower when there's more usage, those are still very, very high numbers. But also with managing expectations, you saw that GitHub Copilot, because it has a limited context, is not very good at helping with debugging. Which is in line with the expectations for the tool, since debugging is quite difficult. We know as a developer that if something goes wrong all the way over here, the cause of it can be at the other end of the application. So that's where it's not that handy. And one thing I love to see is that the programmer is still the main pilot. So you see that 100% of the developers said, like, whatever it suggests, I need to modify it in some way to suit my needs. And that's what we want, because if this would be 0%, we would be worried. Because everyone's just pushing GitHub Copilot code. So for GitHub Copilot within the Rabobank, we're now doing a further rollout to see if the numbers stay the same if we increase the pool size. And we're also looking into some of the extended features of GitHub Copilot X. And one of those, so GitHub Copilot X is a collection term. They are releasing some other tools, for example, chat. I will show that in the next slide. And that's like GitHub Copilot, and then chat is a collection term. They also have pull request, documentation, something else. But what I find really strong about GitHub Copilot Chat is that it's like ChatGPT. You have a chat window in your IDE, and you can really have a conversation with the generative AI tool and iterate while you're working on it. And that's not really how GitHub Copilot itself works. So if you think that workflow is better for your workflow, that's also a possibility that it has. Going to ChatGPT still generated me an image of a cat. I find it funny that I worked with ChatGPT for quite some time, but I actually didn't know what the name was. So the GPT part stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Try saying that 5 times. So just ChatGPT. And I mainly use it for text correction, coding questions, and sometimes jokes when we need it. So version 3 is free, but version 4 has a subscription model. So let's look at a textual correction example. So say there is a conference which is happening today, and you have to write an abstract for it. And it's the end of the day, but you still need to write something catchy so that people will attend your presentation. So you write something with the Boom and AI tools. It is challenging to distinguish between overhyped and genuinely useful ones. So it brings the message, but it's not really, doesn't have that oomph factor. So I asked ChatGPT, can you correct the grammar, make it a little bit better? Because I consider my English good, but it's not C2 level or anything. So it does that. It says, here's an informal version. It's also very polite when it does it. And it says, in the era of AI tools exploding onto the scene, it's no easy task sifting through the overhyped ones and those that generally make a difference. Has a little bit more oomph factor to it, and it's grammatically correct, which is nice. But now that you're busy with it, you think, nah, maybe I'll check a more formal version, see if that's nice. Well, I'm not going to read it again, but based on the words, you can already see, that's a little bit too formal. I don't want to scare away everybody. So I picked the informal one. And then I think, wait, what can ChatGPT do as well? So I ask it for a pirate version, and it does it. So if you rather had preferred the pirate version, please talk to me after. I'll do that next time. But looking at coding examples, I did the same question as I did with the prompting with GitHub Copilot. So I asked it for a Dutch postal code. And you can already see that it's funny that it generates something different than GitHub Copilot generated. So the idea is there, it's like 4 numbers and 2 characters, but yeah, the regex is a little bit different. But one of the things I really find beneficial of ChatGPT is that it explains it. So if you're like a little bit newer to coding, it explains like how the regex works and what you should pay attention to. And the iteration aspect of it is also really powerful. So I say, okay, but I actually expect that since I now learned that from GitHub Copilot, I say, hey, Dutch postal codes cannot start with a 0. And it's awesome because it says, you're correct. That's always nice to read. So it adds it, and then it edits the explanation with that it does not start with a 0. But one thing I not really like about these, like the previous examples, that it's always a too easy example. Like, how do you actually use this in practice? So this is something we're actually doing right now. So you may have already seen on my laptop, my stickers on one of the sides there, that I'm part of the design system. So we have a component library which is prefixed with SFC. So for one of our migrations, we had to find all the HTML tags in one of our repositories and match that tag only if there's also an option inside. And I asked him to do that, and it generated me some amazing regex, which I could never write myself. And it explains it as well. And I tested it, and it works. And the regex is amazing time saver, because otherwise we had to go in different routes, more programming, more scripting, etc. So it's really, really time saver. Then moving on to one other subject I wanted to highlight is that the generative AI parts are really, really great at regex, but I also want to show that it also understands the underlying meaning of your question. So when I ask it, why would you call prevent default on an anchor tag, there are many answers possible. And the question is full of hot keywords, so to say, for Google. So sometimes in Google, you don't actually get the answer you want, or you get some GitHub issue with some popular repository, and then you think, well, I didn't actually get the answer I was looking for. But ChatGPT understands what you're looking for and then says, okay, it is probably because you want to like prevent default for the navigational behavior, and it gives some more examples, etc., etc., etc. So it will really help you with certain questions. Oh yeah. So I also thought, like, can it generate joke with any subject? So I asked it to generate me a joke which is related to programmers and Frontmania. And it's a cringy joke, but it still can do it. So it's because they heard the speakers were always talking about reaching new heights in web development. It's like, thank you. ChatGPT 4 I want to highlight. It's basically a better version of 3, of course. But it is really going one step further with textual recognition. It can speak in dialects now. I wanted to include an example of version 3, version 4, but I think they secretly updated 3 because some of the things they mentioned that you could do only in 4, I could now also do in 3. So, but now 4 is behind the paywall, so that's why they probably have it. So, Midjourney. I really, really like Midjourney. And I use this for the inspiration. I don't have to remind you about the badly drawn house. And presentations, so like the one today. It's also behind a subscription model. They had a free version at some point, but I think that's gone. So what is the workflow with Midjourney? Right now, it's a little bit, I consider it a little bit unprofessional that they use Discord, but I think it was a fast way to market. But you basically say like /imagine, and then you give it the prompt. So in this case, I would say /imagine Midjourney, and it gives me 4 images, of which I can pick one that resonates with me the most. And in the future, they're actually rumored to build their own. They're now building their own web interface and iOS and native apps. But so you have these 4 images generated. And then again, it comes back to the process of iteration. So I picked the ship one, and then I think, okay, I like this, but I actually want it in a different aspect ratio because this is very square looking. So you get a couple of options which you want to do. You can also make a variation of it, make a different part of the image different, but I select custom zoom, and I say I want it to be zoomed out in a different aspect ratio. And it actually just generates more content on the site. And based on this, you get some more options. So the U stands for that you get a better resolution, and then the V, you get variations of that option. So I pick the 4th one, and that's then the one I want to keep. And that iterative flow is really intuitive, and you can really generate the things that inspire you and that you need for your presentation. But it can do way more. One of the cool things is that I asked it to generate me an image of a programmer. And if you've seen Midjourney a couple of times, you can really see the style of Midjourney and recognize it. So then I tried, okay, can you give me a program in somebody else's style? So for the people who don't know, Arthur Adams is a comic book artist from X-Men, which I was and am a fan of. And it does it actually for multiple styles. So I also do Akira Toriyama, which is from Dragon Ball, and everybody knows Disney. And it's the same subject, but in different styles. And that really shows the power that if you want to have something in a certain style with multiple images, you can do that. But right now, the prompts I showed were all simple, because otherwise they wouldn't fit in the yellow box. But you can go way more complex. So I'm not going to go over all the prompts in there. But it basically describes this scene with some more details on the skills of the dragon, and that there should be a hero on top and everything. And it does that as well. But I also want to show that Midjourney is not perfect, because from the 4 images, I picked the top right one, but you can already see that the top left one has 2 dragons merging in one. This one has a very strange leg, and that one doesn't have any arms. So it still can learn a little bit. So to summarize, I've been talking about generative AI with the risks on how to use it. GitHub Copilot for code suggestions and prompting, ChatGPT for textual corrections, coding questions, and of course jokes, and Midjourney for your inspirations and presentations. That's it. Thank you very much.